This is episode number 196. Today we're featuring artist, writer, and film director George Gallo.
This is the PleinAir Podcast with Eric Rhoads, publisher and founder of PleinAir Magazine. In the PleinAir Podcast, we cover the world of outdoor painting. Called PleinAir, the French coined the term, which means open air or outdoors. The French pronounce it plein air. Others say plain air. No matter how you say it, there is a huge movement of artists around the world who are going outdoors to paint. And this show is about that movement. Now, here's your host, author, publisher, and painter, Eric Rhoads.
Well, thank you, Jim Kipping, and welcome to the PleinAir Podcast. Here in Texas, the trees are just now starting to turn color. Now, I painted in Fall Color Week a few weeks ago, and it was brilliant color. We don't get that kind of color around here, so I'm pretty happy just to get any color. And I've been painting the tree across the road, which is this brilliant red, and it's pretty unusual for this area. I loved working on this, trying to figure it out, that fine line between garish color that just doesn't look realistic and that sense of brilliance. And so it's always kind of fun to try and master something new. So that's what I've been kind of doing in the afternoons and the weekends, trying to figure that tree out. It's not going to last much longer. I want to wish you a happy Thanksgiving. Keep your eyes on your email, because I'm sure there's some Black Friday specials coming across your email from us, some things that we've produced over the last couple of years and some specials. Also, a reminder, the PleinAir Convention is coming up in May, and we are going forward. At least that's the plan. So you want to get your seats while you can, and know there's a 100% money-back guarantee in the event our plans or yours are disrupted. So we're all ready to get out, be together, celebrate PleinAir painting, and do it safely and see our friends. So visit pleinairconvention.com. Make a great Christmas gift. Just saying. Okay, I want to remind you that the November deadline for the monthly PleinAir Salon competition is November 30th. It's a good time to enter your best paintings from the year or from the past. There's a $15,000 grand prize for the annual competition on the line, and over $30,000 in cash prizes, including monthly cash prizes. So enter at pleinairsalon.com. And since you're probably thinking about holiday shopping, the ultimate gift is a seat to Watercolor Live. It's our online virtual conference. It's the largest watercolor conference in history, featuring the top tier watercolor masters worldwide, including Joseph Zbukvic, who is considered the best, the king of all watercolor people, and you can book your seat now. But you need to get it before November 30th, coming around the corner, because the price is going to go up by $200. Go to watercolorlive.com. If you've ever been to the PleinAir Convention, this is a totally different experience, and it's a great experience. We get you connected with other artists. We communicate with each other. We have a lot of fun. It's actually a terrific experience. Go to the website, read some of the testimonials. It's watercolorlive.com. Hey, in the current issue of PleinAir Magazine, there's a special feature on Colorado artist Sean Horn, and he is in no hurry when he paints, probably something we could all adapt. You're going to read about why he's taking his time and how it's better in the long run. And, of course, that's one approach, and it probably is a good one. And in this week's PleinAir Today newsletter, it's free, we share a roundup of reader votes on the best PleinAir easels for artists. You don't want to miss that. Coming up after the interview, I'll be answering some art marketing questions in what we call the Marketing Minute. But first, let's get right to our interview. Looking forward to this, with Impressionist painter and film director, my dear friend, George Gallo. George Gallo, welcome to the PleinAir Podcast.
Oh, thank you, Eric.
I'm just blown away. I was just thinking about this. We were talking offline, and I was like, how come this never happened till now? I mean, it's like 3 years into this podcast. I should have had you one of the first guests ever. I'm sorry.
You're absolutely correct there. No, for whatever reason, I guess it just never happened. But I'm very, very happy to do it. The second I got the call, I said, I'm all in.
So I was trying to think about this. You and I became friends. I was living in Florida temporarily. We had, I don't even know why, but I remember the phone rang one time, and it was you on the phone, and you were trying to point something out to me about something you were creating, and I think probably discussing an article or something, and we kind of struck up a friendship back then, and gosh, that's probably, I don't know, 15 years ago?
Yeah, it's about 15 years ago.
Yeah. So before we get started, I think we ought to talk about you've got kind of two lives going on. You have this life of a visual artist, and you have this other life as a visual artist.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So why don't we overcome that right now and help them understand that? So tell everybody what it is you do for a living.
I write screenplays and direct movies, and then the other thing I do is paint. But the primary thing that I do for a living is making films. Right, and you've made some pretty important films. There's some films that have been huge hits over the years. You want to talk about a couple of those? The big hits. I mean, I've certainly done over 20 films. Probably the Midnight Run. I wrote the Robert De Niro, Charles Grodin movie, Midnight Run. I wrote the original Bad Boys with Will Smith, Martin Lawrence. A lot of movies. Middlemen, Luke Wilson, Giovanni Ribisi. I have a film coming out, which seems to have a lot going behind it. People seem to love it. We won 3 film festivals already.
Did you? Well, you've got an all-star cast.
Yeah, it's Robert De Niro again, Tommy Lee Jones, Morgan Freeman, Zach Braff, Emile Hirsch, Eddie Griffin. It's a big over-the-top comedy, which I think we need right now. Because I mean, it's been quite a year. So
you're a comedy writer.
Primarily, although I just did a dark thriller now with Morgan Freeman and Ruby Rose, but primarily I'm a comedy writer, yes.
So do you have to be, without getting into politics here, because we have to be careful we don't do that here, but do you have to be much more sensitive to the kind of jokes that you could do in a film today versus what you could do 20 years ago?
It's an interesting question. Well, the movie that I just did, the big comedy, is, I would say it's not terrifically politically correct. You know, a lot of times, I mean, the whole point of a joke is that it's shocking, you know, and we could get away with more in this movie because it takes place in the 1970s. And I think people talked and behaved, you know, far differently than they do today.
Sure.
And that's part of, the subtext of the movie. It's about some very desperate people. The movie. That's what makes it funny. It's I don't know if you want me to mention the plot or not, but
it's up to you. Sure.
Well, very quickly, it's Robert De Niro he is really on point in this movie. He plays a sort of bottom-feeding 1970s movie producer who is incapable of making a good movie, and he owes his financier, who's a sort of a criminal, crime boss, this guy named Reggie, who is played by Morgan Freeman, and De Niro can't pay him back the money on his latest opus, and together they concoct a scheme, which is they're going to find an actor, Tommy Lee Jones, who's in the retirement home, this old cowboy star, and they're going to heavily insure him and try to kill him in a stunt to collect the insurance money, only to find out that he is just indestructible. They can't kill him. And they keep doing these big, crazy stunts, and he's surviving all of them. And like I say, audiences just love the movie because no matter what they do to Tommy Lee, he just gets up and he dusts himself off, and it's a lot of fun. The movie.
Where do these ideas come from?
Well, that's actually based on an old story that Harry Rhoads wrote, and it was something I've always wanted to make into a film, and it took a lot of years and to put it all together. And I wrote the script with Josh Posner, and for years we shopped it, and we could never really get it going. We had interest in a few places, but we could never get it over the top. And then last January, not this January, but last January, Robert De Niro and I happened to be chatting on the phone, and he had just finished The Irishman, and he said, "Do you have anything funny?" Because he goes, I can't play another psychopath. I says, "Well, I've got a comedy that's sort of a psychopath." He goes, "Well, let me read it." And he read it, and then he said, "I'm in." And then, it's nice. It's nice when movie stars are your friends, and they could just say, "Hey, I'll do your movie."
So, and then when you can go out with a name like that, then the funding just kind of falls in your lap.
It all came together, pretty quickly.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a good lesson in that. It's something that I have realized is really critically important, and that is if you have something that you're passionate about, you just have to be patient. You just keep it in the back of your head, keep working it, and it eventually will happen for you. You've had that happen a lot in your career.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the nature of anything creative. I have never heard of a story where a person wrote something or directed, wrote something certainly, and they sold it instantly, and it got made, and it was a huge hit. It's a life choice, doing this. The same thing with painting. It's I think a lot of great painters painted great paintings that people didn't get right away,
Yeah.
So I think it's part of the nature of what we do.
Now, you did a movie about a painter that was based essentially on your life as a teenager.
Right, Local Color,
Yeah, so how long ago was that you released that now?
That, I believe, was 2005 or right? 2006. That's about the time that we met, isn't it?
Yeah. Doesn't seem possible that much time has passed. Well, I would encourage everybody who hasn't seen it to check it out. George, give us the plot of that and tell us who some of the actors are.
Local Color, it's loosely based on my youth. I was 18 years old, and I wanted so much to be a landscape painter, and it seemed that a lot of the schools at the time were promoting abstract art, and it's not what I wanted to do. And so I found out that a painter that I admired lived not that far from my house, and I tracked him down, and he'd sort of turned his back on painting, and but little by little I worked my way, into his life, and he ended up taking me on a road trip, and we painted for a summer.
And you did that against the resistance of your family.
They were not terribly. I don't think they got it. I mean, today it's probably a little bit different, but I don't know. But I mean, I was, 18 years old, and I said I wanted to be a painter, and my parents were like, "What?
No, you can't make any money as a painter."
Right. No.
Right.
Well, no. I mean, it's very difficult, I would imagine. Yeah.
Well, what I'm saying is that tends to be the attitude of parents. Oftentimes, I still hear kids telling us stories about how they want to go to art school and their parents won't let them because their perception is they can't make any money as painters.
Right. Well, that was what my dad certainly said.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then when I said, okay, I was painting all the time anyway, but then I got this crazy idea in my head, which is even nuttier if you think about it. And I said, you know what, I think I might go to Hollywood and try to become a screenwriter and a director. My father had just about got painting wrapped around his head, and now the poor guy. But anyway.
It worked out.
Yeah, it did work out, but boy, oh boy, when I look back at it, because I knew nobody in Hollywood, I'm not exactly sure how I did it, but I think, again, if you persevere long enough, you only have to have a couple breaks. We talk about Edward Redfield a lot, and Edward Redfield was one of the Pennsylvania Impressionists. He said, I read not that long ago, he said that a painter really only needs one or two breaks, and if you get that one or two breaks, you could be a superstar painter, whatever that is. In my case, as a writer, a couple of people really believed in me, early on, and they were the right people, and suddenly I had a career.
Do you think if you had known what you had to go through in the earlier stages of, knocking on doors and working as hard as you had to, do you think you would have pursued it?
Well, that's it. Again, it's always hindsight. I mean, I think, look, one of the great things about being young is that you have, at least I had boundless energy, and I was completely fearless.
You still are.
And I suppose so.
Well, you more so than anybody that I know, you still have boundless energy and you still are fearless. You will take on projects. Most of us tend to get a little set in our ways, but I remember, I don't know if I can say this or not, but you mortgaged your house and put everything you own up to make one of those movies because you believed in it so much. And
that was Local Color.
Yeah, and you put everything at risk. I mean, how many people are willing to do that anymore? Very few.
I don't know. I have to say, God bless my wife, Julie.
Absolutely.
We've been together 37 years. That was largely her, too. She was like, listen, how many times do you get an opportunity to do something like that? We've been risk takers. I don't know. I never heard a success story where someone didn't take a risk at the beginning. Very few people fall backwards into, a vat of money. I think anyone that risks, and that the other thing is you're not necessarily going to succeed. But then getting back to the same notion, you only have to succeed once or twice on a big gamble. If you that's the life-changing thing. And it's really funny. I read somewhere years ago where they asked a bunch of people that were successful, and I think the question was something like, "You've been working on a project for 2 years, and it hasn't worked out, and then someone comes along and says they'll give you a little bit of financing, would you work on the project for another year?" And all the successful people said, well, if I'm already in for 2 years, what's another year? But a lot of the people that, let's say that's we're more in a middle management level, they'd say, no, after 2 years I would quit. So I don't think you can quit because you're quitting on yourself. That's the thing. Why quit on yourself? That's, just keep trying. It has to connect at some point.
Well, I'm going through something like that right now. About, 2.5 years ago, I ran into a guy from, I can't say who, but let's say it was a 3-letter network. And I said, I've got this idea for a show. And he said, what is it? And I told him the idea off the top of my head. And he said, I want to meet on Monday. And then I met on Monday with he and his team, and they said, we want to do a deal. I mean, just like that. But then, and then he said, but you got to raise the money. And so it's like 2.5 years. I think I've raised about 200 of the 600,000 or 800,000 I need. A small project compared to what you do. And it's like pulling teeth. It's just like nothing has broken loose for the rest of it. And yet I know I'm going to get it. I know that I will persist however long it takes. And so I'm not sweating bullets over it. It's not something I have to urgently do. But I think a lot of us would just say, okay, I put my 2 years in. I've tried. I'm giving up. And I'm just saying, this is too big of an opportunity. I can't give this up.
No, and if it's something that you really want to do, you got to keep trying, I mean, look, if you talk about painting, you talk about going on blind faith, because you have to paint 1,000 horrible paintings before you get to anything good. I mean, you talk about being stubborn.
Well, and you are among the most stubborn I've seen. I've been to your house. I've been to your garage. When I looked in your garage, you probably had 2,030 by 40s in there that you had done because you paint large.
Yeah.
I remember you pulling out paintings and showing me, and you could see the progress. You could, maybe you couldn't, I could. I could see the progress from the earlier paintings to what you were doing now, and how the level of sophistication had improved over and over and over again. I haven't seen what you've been doing lately, but I would imagine
I sent you some pictures for this, so I mean, I don't know if you're flashing them on.
Well, this is audio only, so.
Oh, is it?
It is. Yes.
Oh, okay. Because they asked for some photos of paintings.
Oh well, they're going to put them up. Yeah, they'll put them up on the podcast website.
Got it.
Yeah.
All
okay,
right.
good. I'll look for those and
yeah, I sent you about a dozen of those.
And I have a big beautiful painting here that you did, a gorgeous spring woods scene that you did when we did the video together, and absolutely fabulous.
Thanks,
so
buddy.
let's talk about painting, because I want to get a fair share of time on that. You talked about Redfield and getting breaks as a painter. What do you think he meant by that?
Well, he was, like all artists' stories are, different, and then there's something sort of similar about them if they become successful. He was a guy that, around the turn of the century, certainly, he was painting in Bucks County all by himself, and he was sort of the father. I mean, not that he intended to be, but he became one of the fathers of the Pennsylvania School of Impressionism. And he was out there painting, these sort of large canvases outdoors
in the cold.
In the cold,
in the
snow. Winter. I mean, it's completely crazy, but I admired him just for his not only his technique, but just his moxie, to go out and to do that. And he would paint like literally 50 by 60 canvases outside, pretty much in one shot. And I read not that long ago that he talked about that you really only needed one or two breaks in order to become successful. And he went everywhere with his work, and got rejected. And then one time, someone, I believe from the Corcoran Gallery, heard about him and said, who's this nutty young guy out in the woods, painting these giant paintings? And they said that was Edward Redfield, and he met with the person, and the person gave him a show, and that changed his life. But he had been rejected for at least 10 years, before he caught on.
Well, and it goes back to that persistence story. I remember Matt Smith telling me that he had applied, I think it was Matt Smith, had applied to be in the Prix de West 9 years in a row and was rejected 9 years in a row.
Wow.
And that 10th year, somebody discovered him, right? So, and it changed everything.
That's great. I like Matt. He's a good guy.
Yeah. So,
he's a terrific painter too.
Yeah, fabulous. How much painting are you doing? Because you're obviously kind of juggling right now. You're hot. You've had several movies. You've got a very successful Hollywood career going on. You're spending a lot of time on that. How do you even get any time to paint?
It's funny. I painted yesterday. The second I got back from doing the last film, I just went out and bought a whole bunch of gear, and I've just kind of been at it again. I don't think you ever really stop painting. I had shows when I was in my 20s. At one point, I thought that was going to be what I was going to do with my life, and then the movie thing started to turn into a reality, and then I was doing both. The thing that I felt great about was, painting to me was so pure, and if you try to turn it into a business, you have to make certain business considerations, meaning I would imagine if you paint, whether you do it purposely or by accident, there's some subject matter that, let's say, you get recognized for, then that becomes your thing. Then you could turn that, I suppose, into a good career if you're lucky, in my case, once I started to get paid as a filmmaker, I was like, wow, I'm released of that issue, and
You're
I could
free.
paint. I'm free. I could paint sheerly for the joy of painting, which I think a lot of the earlier painters that I admire, did that. I think they were chasing truth, and then I think the market caught up to them. Today, I think it might be a little more different or difficult. I don't know. I mean, when you think about the Impressionists, I don't think they were thinking about money. I think they were just a bunch of French guys at a cafe, and they were, chasing some goal or some ideal, and not realizing that they were going to change the world. And you talk about rejection; they weren't allowed at the salon. They were.
Well, Monet became a very wealthy man eventually too. So.
Yeah, he did. Like I say, the world caught up to him. I think. I think today it might be a little more different. I don't know. I mean, I'm sure there's people out there painting for the joy of painting who probably aren't being as recognized. There are some terrific painters out there, though. That I think are reaching and stretching. I mean, I think they're doing it for all the right reasons.
There are as many good painters, if not more good painters today than there ever have been. And we're seeing the level of instruction, the videos, the conferences, the things that are helping people elevate themselves. And, in terms of all forms of art, whether it's, academic realism, which we cover in Fine Art Connoisseur, whether it's plein air, it is, and the landscape
great
studio
magazine,
work.
And I just want to tell you, they're great magazines.
Thank you.
Yeah.
But I think the whole idea here is that the level of quality is really, really getting high. And I think that, this is always a little bit of an issue. Sometimes I'm in 3 galleries now, and I have a tendency sometimes to start thinking about, if I do this will really make it sell. And then I think, what am I doing? This isn't, I don't want to do it if it's just to sell it. I want to do it because I enjoy the painting process and I want to say something. And if it sells, great. So I think the ones who finally figured out, I mean, you look at somebody like David Leffel, who's a very dear friend of yours,
right?
A good friend of mine.
I talked to him this morning.
Yeah. And you look at somebody like David does what David wants to do. Now, maybe if you dialogue with him about that, maybe at some point he said, I had to kind of do some paintings to pay the bills, and at least you're painting. But I think at some point, most of the artists who are really good get to that point where they say, you know what, screw the market. I'm going to paint what I love. And if I paint what I love, the market will follow. Do you believe that to be true or not?
Look, yes, I believe it can be true, but, I also understand the need for people to put food on their table, so I never for a second, think that, a person is selling out, people have to eat.
No, I never think that either.
Yeah. Do I believe that the market can catch up with you? Yeah, absolutely. I think, look, I think if you're painting to make money, if that's your thought process, I think you're sort of boxing yourself in, because first of all, you don't really know what's going to sell. You might find, like I say, a subject matter or something that seems to sell for whatever reasons. But ultimately, it's hard to keep recreating that over and over and over again. That's why I think sometimes painters go stale, and then, I'm in an enviable position in that I can wake up in the morning and say, today I'm going to do this, tomorrow I'm going to do that, or, what I'm going to do? I'm going to go on a road trip, I'm going to go paint for 3 weeks, and I don't really have to care, if I sell them or not. I do it for the absolute joy of doing it, and I'm really serious about it. I mean, that. I've read every book there is to read. I study as hard as anyone. it's been my whole life, you know, and painting and filmmaking are not that much different. You know, you're telling a story with a brush, you're telling a story with a camera. It's not, you know, and it's all preparation a lot of times. You know, it's, you know, you can't just make a movie. You have to prepare. You have to think about how you're going to shoot it, what you're trying to say, the colors that you're going to have in the background, what are the colors of the wardrobe. You know, it's all part of the process of telling the story. It's not that much different than, you know, going on a location and looking at something you want to paint and say, okay, this is something I want to paint, and this will be beautiful because of that edge versus that soft line versus that value versus that color. It's very, very similar.
Yeah. I think that's absolutely right. You know, the one thing that happens, though, is we go back to that comment earlier about risk, is that painters get stale, and when they get stale, it starts to show up in their work, and they may think that they're not selling because of some other outside factor, which is also possible. But oftentimes it's because it's like been there, done that, stale. And so if you're responding only to the market, then you're not going to respond to the experimentation. You're not going to respond to the risk, and you've got to take those risks in your work to kind of push yourself to a new level or to a new height. I've told stories many times about a buddy of mine who went to Russia with me, and after seeing the Russian Impressionist work, he said, "I can't paint anymore." And he went back home and stood at the canvases for weeks and said, "I can't do this anymore because these people completely ruined me." But finally, he started taking the risks and broke through, and it changed his painting forever.
That's great, because, you know, I have to tell you, I think the Russian Impressionists out of everybody are probably the closest to those Pennsylvania guys. And I tell you, the Russian Impressionists, they just knock me out. There's something so honest and bold in that work, and it's something I just so respond to.
Yeah, you know, we're
Can
taking
I say something? I don't mean to, I just had a thought, you know, because something that you said. You talk about taking risks. You know, if you're a painter and you have to feed galleries and all of that stuff, and you suddenly want to change what you're doing a little bit, you could lose your gallery and you could lose your audience. And the interesting thing that happens, because this has happened to me, it's happened to me as a writer, it's happened to me as a painter, when you're in the process of making the change, you know, let's say you were very adept at something or good at something, and then you're in the process of making the change, you could get lost and kind of produce work that's not that great for a while because you're about to make a leap to another place. And in that time period of while you're doing that work, a lot of people could look at it and say, you know, let's say your gallery or your audience, to go, you know, he or she's not that good anymore. But they're about to get a whole lot better, and you know, because, you know, you're still not clear what you're reaching for,
right?
You know, but anyway.
Well, I think I like to call that a pre-launch lull. You know, we actually go backwards when we're thinking about something and experimenting with something. We go backwards till we figure it out, and then it launches us to a new thing. That's why adversity and difficult times are so important in growth in anything, whether it's painting or anything else.
Yep.
So, Are you getting outdoors to paint anymore? I used to go out plein air all the time.
I haven't since I've been back from the last movie, but I have so many little sketches, and I have, you know, without exaggeration, I got 50 or 60 sketchbooks where I do lots of line drawings or pencil drawings of places that I remember, and I just flip through them. And I take little notes and stuff, and the second I see them, they kind of come back to me. And I've been kind of recreating things out of my head now. And I've been enjoying that too. Sometimes, it's very funny. Plein air painting versus studio painting. I think ultimately, okay, if you're painting landscapes, there's just no way that you can't be any good unless you've done plein air painting. And I've painted outdoors a lot.
Yeah.
But I think I am a better painter in the studio because I'm not in such a hurry. And I think, when you're painting in a studio and you have some time to think, and, you put something down and then you look at it and then you have time to mull it over, and then say, what I'm going to do, then I'm going to make an adjustment here. And then you look at that. At least for me personally, I found that I've grown quite a bit working in the studio because I'm not, you could get into a mindless routine if you're not careful painting outside, in that you look at something, you drop an easel, you paint frenetically, and, you finish the piece, and it can have a ton of energy in it. But you are doing nothing but dashing out these painting after painting after painting after painting, and you're not thinking a lot about what you're doing. And when you get into a studio, you can have 8, 10, 12 hours to work on a painting as opposed to 2 hours before the light changes. And you can be more contemplative and more selective, certainly,
Well, and more experimental as well. You can.
Yes.
Right. So you can try things, and but to the point that you discussed before, it's that high level of plein air painting, getting out there a lot, that informs you so that when you go in the studio, you know what's going to look right versus what's not going to look right.
Yes, absolutely, Eric. And I think what ends up happening is David LaFell said this to me, and I wasn't aware of it because David and I were talking about painting and landscape painting, and he said something to me. He goes, how do you make these things up out of your head so much? And I said, well, I remember a lot of stuff. And he said, your memory, he said, is pretty remarkable. He goes, in that you seem to have this, over the, five decades of, let's say, painting outside, right? Because I started when I was mid-teens, that you've collected over the years a lot of things in your head, like a rock or a piece of grass, or the way the light caught the side of a birch tree, or the way, a branch cracked off a maple tree and the light caught that little hub, that little nub on the. I have all these things that have just been collecting hundreds of ideas as I'm working, and a lot of times as I'm painting a painting in the studio, those things will come back to me, like, oh, that tree I saw, 20 years ago, how that tree now felt to me, not that the tree is anatomically correct, but the notion of that tree is correct, or the feeling that tree gave me is correct.
So how does painting or composition in painting inform your film work and vice versa?
Another great question. Let me answer it this way, okay? There's several ways to answer that question. I try to be the most focused as possible. I teach every once in a while. I'll go to colleges and I'll teach about the directing and thinking like a director. And I think there's a very similar thing between thinking like a director and thinking like a painter. And like the first thing a student may ask you is, well, what lens will I use here? And I always say, that's not really the right question. The first question is, what am I trying to say? What's the scene really about? What these two people that are talking here, what's really going on in the scene? Because ultimately, the lenses you choose, the colors you choose, whether or not you're going to move the camera, whatever those personal choices you're going to make, that's the subtext of the scene. So what's really going on in the scene? Oh, I guess these two people are talking. They're falling in love. Aha. Well, now that's going to inform me. Is it a lyrical sort of move? Is it longer lenses? Tend to be the lenses of romance because they focus on the eyes. And see, now I'm starting to make choices based on an idea. Like a lot of times, like when I was teaching painting, I used to do this class, and we were all up in Carmel, and I stayed very close with a lot of these students, and we would all go out, we would all pick a spot, and everybody would drop their easel. And before I had my easel open, a lot of them were painting already, and I'd say, whoa, 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 whoa. Does everybody know what they're doing or why they're doing this? And a lot of people would sort of shrug and say, guys, you got to take a breath, look at what you're painting, and then ask yourself, why am I painting this? What do I want to say about it? You got to be very, very clear from the start why you're doing it. You got to paint it in your head, and then you won't make a lot of mistakes along the way because you've worked out the compositional ideas, you've worked out what the subject is, you've worked out, what you're going to focus on, your hardest edge, your softest edge, your warms, your cools, and you work all that stuff out, and then hopefully, you're fairly armed and dangerous walking into the painting you're about to do. But if you just start randomly working on something and you haven't worked it all out, which also brings me to Redfield, if I could digress for a second. Redfield used to paint those giant paintings outside, but he would go out the day before and he would just sit there for hours looking at the spot that he was going to paint. And he painted the whole painting in his head. And he went to bed at night thinking about the painting and how he was going to execute everything. And then he woke up in the morning and he put his gear together, and then he went out and he executed it. But he had worked out a lot of the difficult problems already so that the execution of the painting, there was a clearer path to the finished, as opposed to slapping paint on and not knowing what your foreground elements were going to be, what exactly is your subject matter going to be. You got to work all that out in advance. Same thing with directing a movie. You shoot the entire movie before you start shooting it. That's not to say you don't leave yourself open to happy accidents. Sometimes an actor could do something, you go, well, that's really funny, let's chase that, let's see where that takes you. But you're on a very firm footing. Same thing as a painting, sometimes, because I paint fast, the wrong color could end up on the canvas because I'm not watching exactly, where my brush went, on the palette, and then I can lay it down, and let's say a little piece of blue could end up there that I didn't intend to be there. But if I look at it and I go, that's pleasing, I go, oh, well, maybe I could play around with that idea a little bit, But I'm already in a very secure place so that I could do things like that, as opposed to I haven't worked it all out. And the greatest painter on earth is going to get lost if he hasn't figured out. I mean, Richard Schmid talks about it in his book. If he hasn't figured it all out before he starts, he can get lost. Anyone could get lost, if you don't have a firm idea. So if anything, I would say to anybody, really truly make up your mind what your painting is going to look like to some pretty solid degree before you jump in.
So when you go outdoors, which you haven't done for a while, but so do you just kind of sit around and stare? Do you have a kind of a mental checklist you're going through?
Well, sometimes you just see something and you go, oh my God, But as a general rule, I've got spots. I haven't visited them lately, but there was like one tree in particular in Malibu Canyon that any time of the day it just looked differently. It was just old, beautiful, gnarly tree. It unfortunately burned in the fire they had out there. But this tree and I were intimate buddies, and so I always knew that was a go-to, for me. There's certain spots I would go to that I was just attracted to the design, and so I would go back and forth to a lot of these places. If you look at a lot of painters, you'll notice that they had a tendency to paint a lot of the same locations over and over again because they felt very intimately acquainted with those places. And if you don't paint them for a long time, you kind of miss them, and you want to go visit again. Not that I'm not open to new stuff, but I think, and they always look different. The light is always different every day, the different seasons.
Well, McPherson did that book on 365 days in front of his pond, and there wasn't one painting that looked the same.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that book. Yeah, that's a great experiment. I've never done that. That's real. That's real dedication.
Well, he gets to do that full time. You have a little other small business here occupying your time.
Yeah. Well, I think a couple of more. I've been saying this forever. A couple more, and I might.
Oh, stop! You're addicted. You know you're addicted.
Yeah, but I'll tell you something, Eric. Yes, I am. But I'll tell you, the difference is the difference between making a painting, at least for me, and making a movie, is that a movie is all about conflict, and there's resolution at the end. I think we've had this discussion, right? Yeah. If you look at any movie, there's a problem somewhere with the main character at the beginning, and then they figure out ways to grapple with the issue all the way through, and then there's some sense of resolution at the end of the piece. In a painting, it's a lot of harmony for me. It's color harmony, it's design harmony. And yes, I would imagine that, let's say, things collide to some degree, but it's a very beautiful, harmonious collision, and I'm in a much better state of mind when I'm painting than when I'm making a movie. I'd like to be able to quit when I'm ready to quit, as opposed to Hollywood tells me, "All right, you're done." But as I don't love directing. I love having directed a movie, if that makes any sense. When it's all finally finished and you look at it and you hear people laugh and applaud, you go, okay, that was worth it.
Yeah, that's a lot of hard work, though. I don't think anybody understands the depth of difficulty it is to do that.
To make a film?
Yeah, to direct a film.
The directed movie. There's a great line in Rocky where Sylvester Stallone says, "You got to be a moron to want to be a fighter." And I always say, "You got to be a moron to want to be a movie director," because you're up a lot of times. Look, the pay is good. Don't get me wrong. But if you're shooting at nights, it's horrible weather. A lot of times equipment is always breaking down. Actors are not always the most cooperative. They don't always act in their best interest. And sometimes you feel more like a gym teacher, like you should have a whistle around your neck. And you're trying to wrap your arms around this massive 18-wheel tractor trailer that doesn't have any brakes. And you're like, you're literally hanging onto the steering wheel, just trying to keep the whole thing afloat. And you're also responsible for millions of dollars,
and hundreds of jobs.
And hundreds of jobs. And I really care about what I'm doing. And so yes, it could be a very high stress job. Where painting is like, man, I love it. I set up in the woods by myself. Nobody bothers me, and nobody has to come along and say, hey, does it have to be a red barn? I don't have to listen to a lot of, foolishness behind me. So it's a much more relaxing and peaceful and Zen-like thing to paint. But they're similar in the way, let's say the thought process that goes on to make them, but the stress level of it, I never had any stress, painting. And if a painting didn't work out, it wasn't like I blew $100,000 that day. I screwed up a canvas, So.
Well, sometimes it's all relative, right? So for some people, a canvas is like $100,000. So, George, you had the benefit of studying under, what was his name? Was it Cheroff?
George Cherepov.
Cherepov. So you had the benefit of studying under him, and he was a Russian, well-trained Russian master. Yes. You've got a lot of experience under your belt. For the people who might be kind of new to plein air painting or new to painting at all, would you impart a little wisdom of some principles that you think are important everybody considers?
Wow. Is this your exit question? You always do this to me. You did this on the other thing.
Yeah. Well, I have to do it. That's my job.
I know.
It's tough.
What principles would I impart to plein air painters starting out?
Or to anybody. I mean, you have had the benefit of studying under some of the best. You've figured things out on your own. There's got to be a couple of things that are core essentials that if you were teaching workshops today, you would attack those things first.
I would, and I've said this, first of all, don't beat yourself up. That's a hard one, okay? The hardest one is especially the personality of the type of person that wants to be an artist. A lot of times can get lost in self-recrimination. I'll never be any good. All of those horrible tapes we hear in our heads. I would try to avoid all of that. I would accept the fact that you're probably not going to be very good at the beginning. I don't even know what good means, but you're not going to paint a masterpiece very quickly. And even if you did, it's probably an accident. I think a lot of times you can get one right coming out of the gate, but it's going to take a long time. Enjoy the ride. It really is the trip. It's not the result, if that makes any sense. If you get too caught up in results, a lot of times you just put too much stress on yourself. I would say to anyone who's painting outside to really, really, really look, really learn to re-see what they're looking at, because you're not really painting a tree. You're not really painting a rock. You're not really painting a mountain. You're not really painting a cloud. If you get into those thoughts, you really can get lost. You have to look at it and say to yourself, I'm painting a shape. I'm painting a series of shapes that are either warm or cool colors. Figure out what the color is, and then find the simplest way to put that down. I hope that makes sense, because if you start looking at clouds and all of these things, you get you can get lost. But if you think, here's another thing, and don't assume any color is the color you think it is, because I've seen students start painting the sky blue, and I'm like, the sky's not blue right now. What are you doing? It's like you're not looking. Right. You have to really look and see how each thing relates to the thing next to it. How the sky is like, let's say, the mother of the entire painting, and how all that light falls down onto everything, and how there's a little bit of that light in everything on the ground. Some of that warmth is everywhere. And just, again, think of shapes. That's it. Like a mountain is a shape, and it's a particular color. It's a particular value. And look at it that way. Try to look at everything in the abstract, which was very hard for me when I was starting out, and pick a point of interest that's going to be the subject of your painting. Because as they say in acting class, if everything becomes important, then nothing is important. So find something to focus on and make that the meal, the subject of the painting, and then have everything become secondary to that.
Great advice. All great advice.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thanks for doing this podcast.
Oh, I love doing it. I love talking about this stuff. It's, and I don't know, it's just, what did George Wesley Bellows? Oh, another great piece of advice. Robert Henry said, don't set out to create good art, but live a life where good art becomes inevitable.
Wow. Perfect ending.
Okie doke.
Well, George and I could probably talk all day. As a matter of fact, we've had conversations like this that have gone deep into the evenings, sometimes maybe aided by a cocktail or two, just saying. Anyway, he's a fun and talented guy, a really terrific guy, fun to be around, and I really cherish his friendship. And I think this was very valuable. I think I learned a lot from it. I hope you did too. Hey, are you guys ready for some marketing ideas?
This is the Marketing Minute with Eric Rhoads. author of the #1 Amazon bestseller, Make More Money Selling Your Art, Proven Techniques to Turn Your Passion into Profit.
In the Marketing Minute, I answer your art marketing questions. You can email yours at eric@artmarketing.com. Here's a question from Rachel Harris, who attended the recent Realism Live online conference, and her question is about commissions. She asked, what's the best way to find a market for commission work? By commissions, she means doing paintings that people commission you to do, right? That's what I think she means. Anyway, start with this idea. First off, people don't know the word commissions. It is not a term used by regular, everyday people. If they think commissions, they think like they're getting a sales commission on something. So don't confuse them. They don't know the term. The best way to present it is to look at people who are lookers. Let's say you're in a gallery environment or they come to your studio, they're looking around. You can drop a hint very subtly, say, by the way, if you don't find something you like, we also can do some custom paintings of your favorite subjects or your favorite people. You know, sometimes people ask me to paint a deceased aunt or uncle or a brother or a family member or their kids or, you know, or their favorite vacation home. What you want to do is load their lips. You know, you could say things like, hey, have you ever been on a trip and you found like this place that totally inspired you? If you can get me a photograph of that, I'll create a beautiful big painting, you know, any size you want for your home of that particular subject. Put the ideas in their head because they don't think of it themselves, and then put it everywhere. Put it on your newsletter, your website, in your ads. You know, ask me about creating custom paintings of your favorite subjects. Don't use the word commissions. Also, it's a good idea for your website. Do a story on it, like tug at their heartstrings a little bit. You know, like, you know, Jane's husband died. They were the happy couple. They lived together for 40 years. And Jane remembers when they first met, and, you know, Bob was 30 and she just loved him so much. And she found a photo of when he was 30. So she asked me to do a painting of it. So I did this painting of him when he was 30, and she just cherishes it. It's one of her favorite things. And so, you know, you could talk about how that works and then do a little story for your website or for your newsletter, and that's a good thing. And remember, insider terms are things people don't understand. Don't use insider terms. Now, here's a question from Mike Freelander in Scottsbluff, Nebraska. Hi, Mike. He says, because social media is so big these days, it seems like I don't need anything else. Do you agree? Well, I'm assuming Mike is saying, I'm not sure I need anything else for marketing. Well, that's a slippery slope, Mike. If you're using it and it's selling as much work as you want it to sell and it's working for you, no, you don't need anything else until it stops working. And the problem with that is there's a thing called a single point of failure. So a single point of failure, let's say that you are flying an airplane and it's a single engine airplane, and that single engine goes dead while you're up at 10,000 feet. What are you going to do? Well, you know, if you have a twin engine airplane, you still have another engine to back up for you. Well, the same is true in marketing, and this is a common problem. It's something that happens a lot, and that is that people have a single point of failure. They put all their money into a single marketing source, and suddenly, sometimes that single marketing source stops working, or it dries up, or there's regulation that changes everything. A friend of mine was in the infomercial business, and the law changed in one day. He went from having $1 billion business to having no business. And that's because he had a single point of failure. If he had other marketing things going on. So I like to think of it as the Parthenon. I've talked about this in the past. Think of the Parthenon. It has multiple columns. If you had the thing on the Parthenon, what do they call that thing? Focusing on a single column, and that got hit by a car, well, the rest of the building would come down, right? And so you want to have at least 3 columns because it'll make it more stable, but it's better to have 5 or 6 columns. You want to spread your money around a little bit, and it's not necessarily right to spread it inappropriately. For instance, you can spread too many places to advertise, and then you're not getting enough traction from what you're doing, and that's a whole nother topic. But the reality is social media can be good. Some artists are telling me they're selling some work from it. I don't hear very often that artists are selling all their work on it. You want to have a gallery, or you want to have a direct marketing line. You want to have your social media. You might want to have some advertising. You might want to have a lot of other things. Social media is great for getting leads, but it's not great for getting buyers. Now, there are, again, exceptions to that rule. And so what you want to do is say, okay, how do I generate leads? How do I create something that I get a lead from spending that money, and then those leads can be warmed up and turned into a customer over time? What I find with most of my artist friends, and most of the artists I deal with, and some that I've consulted with, that most of them have their social media following or other artists, and they really don't have a lot of known collectors, known art buyers on there. As a result, when they post something or when they advertise, it's not necessarily reaching the right people. So it's very tricky. And so most people misuse social media. I mean, social media is a beautiful thing. Don't get me wrong. I love it. It's very effective, and it's a good way to stay in touch with people and to put your work out there. It's also a good way to be misunderstood, because if you're putting out, a lot of people put out unfinished paintings. People don't read. They think it's finished, and they go, oh, why would he post that? It's not very good. So like all things, though, my marketing philosophy is stand in the river where the money is flowing. And wherever the money is flowing, you need to be there. And for me, the money is flowing where there are massive amounts of known buyers of art, people who are collectors of art, who are our kinds of collectors. That's why things like, my audiences at Fine Art Connoisseur, PleinAir, those are the river where the money is flowing. Those people buy paintings. They buy lots of paintings. We sell tons of paintings through ads from various collectors if people have effective ads. And yes, you can employ social media. I use social media. I spend a lot of money on social media, but I use it very specifically. I very rarely ever get buyers from social media. I get leads, and then I have to figure out how do I turn them into buyers. That's a whole nother complicated subject. It's something we can address on another day. But the bottom line is, anything that's working for you, keep putting money after it. And just know that everything dries up at some point. Sometimes it's your own fault because you're doing bad advertising or bad marketing, but you can change that. And so you want to constantly be monitoring what's happening. Anyway, hope you enjoyed the Marketing Minute.
This has been the Marketing Minute with Eric Rhoads. You can learn more at artmarketing.com.
Hey, a reminder to get your seats for the PleinAir Convention at pleinairconvention.com, to enter your painting before the end of the month at pleinairsalon.com, and to check out Watercolor Live at, of course, watercolorlive.com. If you've not seen my blog where I talk about art and life and lots of other things, check it out. It's called Sunday Coffee, and you can find it at coffeewitheric.com. You can subscribe. It's free. Got a lot of people reading, which is kind of nice. Well, this is kind of nice too. This is fun. Let's do it again sometime, like next week. I will see you then. My name is Eric Rhoads. I'm the publisher and founder of PleinAir Magazine, and you can find us online at outdoorpainter.com. Remember, it's a big world out there. Go paint it. We'll see you. Bye-bye.
This has been the PleinAir Podcast with PleinAir Magazine's Eric Rhoads. You can help spread the word about plein air painting by sharing this podcast with your friends. And you can leave a review or subscribe on iTunes so it comes to you every week. And you can even reach Eric by email, eric@pleinairmagazine.com. Be sure to pick up our free ebook, 240 plein air painting tips by some of America's top painters. It's free at pleinairtips.com. Tune in next week for more great interviews. Thanks for listening.